In the eternal night of a dying galaxy, there was once a whisper that called itself the Force. It moved unseen, binding stars, bending fate, and weaving destinies into a grand tapestry of light and shadow. But now, that whisper was screaming. The stars themselves seemed to recoil as a storm unlike any the cosmos had ever known tore across reality. It was not merely a wound in space, it was a rift, a howling scar that devoured the laws of physics and sanity alike. From within it came a figure suspended between annihilation and rebirth, a man bound in armor scorched by his own fury. His name, once spoken with fear and reverence in another universe, was Starkiller, apprentice, weapon, shadow of the Sith. He had been chasing death when the universe tore open beneath his feet. The remnants of a battle his master's final test had ended in blinding white light. He had thought it the end. Instead, it became a transition. The force that once obeyed him convulsed, collapsing in on itself, as if rejecting his existence. Then came the silence, and beyond that, silence, madness. He awoke in a sea of red. The sky churned like molten blood, and the ground pulsed as though it were alive. Shattered moons hung motionless above him, fragments of a broken world orbiting nothing. He could feel the force, but it was no longer the force. Its rhythm was wrong, its texture was wrong. It was vast, yes, but violent, incoherent, hateful. He stretched out his hand and felt it claw back. "What is this?" His voice broke through the static of the void. The energy that answered was not serenity, not balance, it was hunger. He recoiled instinctively. The presence that filled this place was ancient and diseased, like a mind that had forgotten itself. Every breath carried the scent of rust and decay. He had entered the warp, though he did not yet know its name. Time fractured. The storm that had carried him here refused to let him go. Images blinked in and out of existence. A towering golden palace of impossible scale, armies of steel and prayer marching beneath banners of skulls, and a figure seated upon a throne of deathless machinery whose will burned brighter than any sun. The vision clawed at Starkiller's mind. He saw billions of souls extinguished in a single heartbeat, not by hate, but by faith. "You are not of this galaxy," a voice said from nowhere and everywhere at once. "And yet, you reek of power." Starkiller spun, his lightsabers igniting with a twin snap hiss that filled the crimson air. The plasma blades cast flickering light on a landscape of bones and shattered metal. There was no speaker, only the echo of something greater, something that used the warp as its tongue. "Show yourself." Silence answered. Then, faintly, laughter, distant, mechanical, divine. He began to walk. Each step crunched upon relics of forgotten empires. Towers of Gothic machinery rose around him, their peaks vanishing into the haze. Servitors, half human, half machine, crawled across the ruins, whispering binary prayers to a sunless sky. They ignored him completely, as though his existence were invisible to the laws that governed this place. He saw the sigil of the Imperium of Man carved into rusted walls. He could not read its script, but he felt the meaning. Submission, duty, survival. It was the same creed the Sith had offered him, though cloaked in different lies. A galaxy ruled by fear. Some things never change. Yet even fear felt small here. This place did not inspire terror, it manufactured it. Every structure, every shadow, every whisper in the wind served a single purpose: to remind all things of their insignificance. When he reached the remains of a cathedral half swallowed by ash, he felt it again, the force, straining against something vast and sickening. He closed his eyes, letting instinct take over. He drew in the power, felt it course through his veins, seeking the calm that once lay at the heart of his strength. But calm never came. The energy burned him. It mocked him. It tore through every nerve, screaming 1,000 names. Tseentch, Nurgle, Slanesh, Kornan laughed when he tried to command it. He fell to his knees, smoke rising from his skin. "You do not control the warp," something whispered from the dark corners of his mind. "It controls you," he roared, unleashing a surge of raw force energy. The ground split apart. The cathedral collapsed. Shadows twisted and screamed. For a brief, blinding moment, the storm within him was louder than the warp itself. And then, as quickly as it came, the power recoiled. It was then that Starkiller realized the terrible truth. Here, his greatest weapon was a curse. Hours or perhaps days passed. Time did not obey logic here. Hunger and exhaustion meant nothing. He wandered through dead cities, where statues of saints crumbled into dust and the sky wept blood. He found the remains of soldiers clad in ceramite, their armor scorched by plasma fire, their faces still frozen in prayer. He tried to search their minds, to read their final thoughts through the lingering echoes of death. What he found instead was agony beyond comprehension. These men had welcomed their deaths. They had burned for something greater, something he could not name. They die for faith. A voice murmured behind him. He turned and saw no one, only the flicker of a shadow against the storm, tall and regal, crowned with light that did not belong in this world. "Who are you?" Starkiller demanded. "A question you should ask yourself," the voice replied, its tone both majestic and hollow. "You are not the first to fall through the warp, nor will you be the last. But you carry something familiar, something defiant." The light grew brighter. For a heartbeat, Starkiller saw him, the Emperor of mankind, seated upon the golden throne, his flesh rotting but his will eternal. "You have power," the Emperor's voice thundered across reality. "Use it for mankind, or be devoured by the warp itself." The vision vanished. Only ash remained. Starkiller stood motionless, his heart pounding like thunder. He did not understand the words, but their weight pressed against his soul. Use it for mankind. It was not an order, it was a challenge. The force pulsed violently within him, as though testing his resolve. He looked to the horizon. The storm was closing in again, swallowing the last traces of the ruined world. There was no way back. No ships, no stars, only war, faith, and madness. He tightened his grip on his sabers. "If this is another empire," he muttered, "then I will tear it down, just like the last." Lightning arced across the blood-red sky, illuminating the desolation. Somewhere within that endless void, unseen gods stirred. The warp had found a new toy, a weapon born from another universe, forged in hate and tempered by betrayal. And as the storm consumed him once more, the galaxy itself seemed to whisper, "Welcome to the 41st Millennium." Starkiller. When Starkiller awoke, the world was silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that follows absolute destruction, the kind that devours sound itself. He lay among the ruins of a dead city, its towers shattered into iron teeth that bit into a crimson horizon. Ash drifted through the air like falling snow, settling upon the remains of what had once been a civilization. He tried to breathe, and the air tasted like rust and sorrow. The force, the thing that had once guided him, was fractured, muted, unrecognizable. When he rose to his feet, the ground crunched with bone. Everywhere, signs of annihilation. Vast trenches burned with chemical fire. Mountains had been peeled open by bombardment. The corpses of titanic machines lay half buried, their adamantium frames fused to the earth as though the planet itself had tried to swallow its shame. On the horizon, a once golden spire burned with perpetual flame. He could feel it. The echo of something greater, something ancient, and then he heard the whisper. It was not the Force. It was something older, darker, immeasurable in scope. It spoke without sound, its words threading through the marrow of his bones. "You walk the ruins of devotion." He spun, lightsabers igniting in a single motion. Blue and red light crossed like the veins of a dying sun, casting twin shadows across the skeletal landscape. There was nothing there. Only the storm, and the faint vibration of unseen power crawling beneath the surface of reality. "Who speaks?" he demanded. "Show yourself." No answer, only the slow roll of thunder in a sky that was bleeding itself dry. Hours passed, or perhaps seconds. Time was meaningless here. The planet was a corpse, yet it breathed with the rhythm of something alive. As he walked, he saw them, statues of saints, all weeping molten tears. Their faces were carved in agony, their hands raised toward a distant heaven that had long since stopped listening. At their feet were offerings of flesh fresh, still steaming, still twitching. A ritual, performed after the world's death. Something within him began to stir, a memory, a voice. "Your hatred is power. It gives you focus. Darth Vader's words, echoing from another life. But here, even hatred felt small. It was insufficient. The Force was no longer his ally, it was a stranger, wearing a familiar face. Every time he tried to grasp it, it writhed like a living thing, hissing in defiance. He closed his eyes. He reached out, calling to it not as a weapon, but as instinct. He sought clarity, purpose, anything. What answered him was pain. "The Force, no," this warp screamed. Thousands of voices spoke at once, all begging, cursing, promising. The noise drove him to his knees, his mind filled with visions of burning stars, screaming angels, and men turning into monsters, while whispering prayers to gods of filth and madness. He pressed his hands to his head and screamed back. When the noise subsided, he realized he was no longer alone. From the ash rose a figure, impossible in its scale. It was not flesh, not light, but something in between, a projection woven from thought and terror, a shape vast enough to blot out the horizon. Its eyes burned like twin suns, but behind them lay exhaustion so deep it felt eternal. "You are not of this galaxy." The voice was layered, distorted, ancient. It filled the air, the ground, the space between molecules. Starkiller stumbled back, his sabers still burning. "What are you?" A question I have long forgotten how to answer. The being stepped closer, or rather, reality folded to bring it nearer. He could feel it gazing through him, dissecting every particle of his existence. For a heartbeat, he saw flashes of his own past projected into the storm. Vader's silhouette, the Emperor's throne room, the fall, the betrayal, the final surge of light that had killed them both. And then, the vision shifted. He saw a man upon a throne of machines, his flesh desiccated, his veins filled with light, his eyes, if they could be called, that burned with such brilliance that it hurt to look at them. Around him, a billion voices prayed, cried, screamed. "You seek meaning," the voice thundered, "but here there is none. There is only survival." "Then why am I here?" Starkiller demanded. "What is this place?" "You are where gods devour gods." For a moment, he thought the apparition smiled. Then, in a tone colder than the void itself, it said, "You have power. Use it for mankind, or be devoured by the warp itself." The words seared themselves into his mind. His lightsabers flickered and died. The figure dissolved, leaving behind only wind and a silence that seemed to mourn. He fell to his knees again. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. "Use it for mankind." The phrase echoed like a curse. Mankind, not humanity, not compassion. Mankind. The word carried the weight of command, of empire, of divine tyranny. He looked to the burning horizon and saw figures emerging from the mist, armored soldiers in tattered ceramite, their helms shaped like skulls. They carried relics that glowed faintly with psychic fire. Their eyes, if they still had any, were hollow. They spoke not to him, but to the air. "By the light of the golden throne, purge the unclean." The Inquisition had arrived. Starkiller raised his sabers once more. "Unclean," he whispered, almost laughing. "They always say that." The Force, or what remained of it, answered with a tremor. The ground erupted, and he moved without thought. Blue and red arcs carved through the haze, meeting bolter fire and psychic flame. For every warrior he struck down, two more emerged from the fog. But amid the chaos, he saw something else, something that froze him mid-strike. Behind the soldiers, carved into the steel hull of a ruined ship, was an image. A man upon a golden throne, radiant and terrible, one arm outstretched toward eternity. The Emperor of mankind. The figure from his vision. The voice that had spoken to him. And for the first time since his arrival, Starkiller felt something close to fear. He fled the battlefield, pursued by fire and prayer. Everywhere he ran, the dead world seemed to shift around him, reshaping itself into corridors of black metal and burning scripture. His body ached, his mind screamed, but something greater had begun to awaken inside him. Not the Force, not the dark side. Something new. Something born from the union of both and twisted by this galaxy's hatred. When he finally collapsed beneath a ruined archway, he looked to the sky and saw the storm again. Only this time, it looked back. It pulsed, alive with thought, and for the briefest moment he saw the shape of a golden figure seated within it. surrounded by endless machinery and unending prayer. Use it for mankind. He closed his eyes, and the words branded themselves into his soul like molten steel. He had crossed galaxies, survived death, defied gods, yet here he was but a spark in a hurricane older than eternity. And as the wind howled with the voices of the warp, Starkiller understood the cruelest truth of this new universe. In the grim darkness of the far future, power was not salvation. It was damnation with a crown. They came for him at dawn, or what passed for dawn, on a world where the sun had long since drowned in ash. The air shimmered with static as a column of armored figures advanced through the ruins. Each step of their ceramite boots echoed with finality. They bore symbols of a double-headed eagle and the words Inquisitio Dominatus carved into their pauldrons. Servo skulls hovered above them, whispering fragments of scripture as their lenses flickered with red light. When they found him among the rubble, Starkiller was kneeling beside a burned corpse, his sabers extinguished. To them, he was no man, only an anomaly. A radiant wound in the shape of a human. By order of his divine majesty, one of them intoned, "You are to be taken alive for examination." The moment the Inquisitor spoke, Starkiller felt 100 minds press against his own. Psychers untrained, undisciplined compared to the mystics of his galaxy, but bound together in something darker. Their combined presence was heavy, like chains tightening around his soul. He tried to push back with the Force. The warp pushed harder. Pain blossomed behind his eyes. The psychic net snapped shut, and the world became black. When he awoke, he was bound inside a cell of cold iron and humming energy fields. The air buzzed with sanctified current. Each wall was engraved with words he couldn't understand, but their intent was clear. They weren't meant to contain a man. They were meant to contain a god. A servo skull floated near the ceiling, its optic sensors blinking as it recorded his every breath. In the distance, a low chant rolled through the corridor. Monks of the Mechanicus, reciting binary psalms to bless their machines. He reached out with the Force. Nothing. It was as though reality itself rejected him. The energy he called upon twisted in his grip, turning to smoke and glass. He felt it gnaw at him, trying to feed on his will. He pulled back before it could devour more. "So," a voice said from beyond the cell door, "the heretic awakens." The door hissed open. A man entered, draped in robes of black and crimson. His armor was etched with purity seals and strips of parchment filled with prayers. A rosette of the Inquisition gleamed at his collar. His eyes were mechanical gold, and red irises whirring as they adjusted their focus on Starkiller. "You are no ordinary psyker," the Inquisitor said. "Our instruments scream when you breathe. The Mechanicus calls you an echo from the dark age of technology. The Ecclesiarchy believes you are a daemon, and I..." He stepped closer, placing a gloved hand against the shimmering field. "I think you're something far worse." Starkiller said nothing. The Force trembled inside him, weak and alien. "Tell me your name." "Galen Marek," Starkiller whispered, his voice rough. "But that name no longer matters." The Inquisitor tilted his head, intrigued. "Then what does?" "Survival." The man laughed an ugly, metallic rasp. "Good, you'll fit right in." Days blurred into each other, or perhaps they were years. In the dark of the chamber, Starkiller lost his sense of time. His captors fed him just enough to keep him conscious. Servo skulls monitored his vitals, whispering machine prayers to purge the taint of his aura. He heard the screams of other prisoners, psychers dragged into experimentation rooms, never to return. He learned to read the rhythm of the fortress. The clang of boots signaled patrols. The distant hymns meant executions. When the chanting stopped, that was when he feared most, because it meant the Inquisitors were watching. Then, one night, the silence broke. The Inquisitor returned. This time, he wasn't alone. A pair of tech priests shuffled behind him, half machine, half man, their faces hidden behind cog-toothed masks. One carried a vial of glowing liquid, the other a bundle of iron rods covered in runes. "We are going to test something," the Inquisitor said, "to see whether your Force can endure the touch of the warp." The rods were driven into the floor. The vial was uncorked. The room filled with a stench like burning ozone. The tech priests began to chant in binaric tones, summoning a shimmer of energy that warped the air. Starkiller felt it instantly. The warp reached out, not as power, but as intent. It recognized him. It wanted him. "What are you doing?" Starkiller growled. "Opening a window," the Inquisitor said, "to see what peers through when it smells your soul." The air screamed, colors inverted, the lights flickered and died. For a moment, Starkiller saw faces, millions of them, pressing against the barrier of reality. They laughed. They knew his anger, his guilt, his fear. He tried to control it, to bend it, but the warp was not the Force. It was chaos given thought. Every attempt to master it only deepened his torment. And then he snapped. The restraints shattered. The energy field imploded, dragging everything inward. The tech priests disintegrated before they could scream. Starkiller rose, surrounded by an aura of twisted light that flickered between crimson and void black. The Inquisitor staggered back, covering his eyes. "By the throne." Starkiller extended his hand. The Force returned in a surge of unnatural violence, ripping through the chamber like a hurricane of souls. Metal screamed, stone wept molten tears, but the Inquisitor did not die. He raised a talisman engraved with the sigil of the Aquila, and it blazed with psychic fire. The storm recoiled. "You think this power makes you a god?" The Inquisitor roared over the chaos. "You are but a spark, an impurity to be refined in the Emperor's flame." And in that instant, Starkiller saw it, the man's absolute belief, a faith so pure it defied comprehension. His will was iron, his devotion unbreakable. He had seen Sith Lords worship power, Jedi worship peace, but this man, he worshipped submission. When the light finally died, Starkiller was once again on his knees. The Inquisitor stood over him, his robes torn, his face bleeding from a dozen cuts. "I have seen your heart," the Inquisitor said, "and it is hollow. But perhaps the Emperor sees yours even in emptiness." He gestured to the guards. "Bind him. He is to be transported to Terra. Let the Adeptus Astra Telepathica examine him. If he survives the journey, perhaps he on the throne will decide his fate." Starkiller lifted his head, his voice raw but steady. "I don't serve your Emperor." The Inquisitor's smile was thin as a knife. "No one serves him willingly, but in time, all serve." As they dragged him away, Starkiller looked back at the ruins of his cell. The walls were cracked and bleeding energy. The warp still whispered, faintly mocking, coaxing, promising. He knew this was only the beginning. For the first time, he understood the nature of this new galaxy. It wasn't ruled by logic or morality. It was ruled by faith, weaponized and absolute. And as the ship's engines ignited and the stars turned red outside his prison window, Starkiller whispered into the void, "If your God made this world, then I will make him remember fear." The journey through the void was agony. They chained him within a transport built for psychers, one of those black, iron coffins the Imperium called null cages. Every inch of its surface was lined with sigils drawn in the blood of saints, forged to silence thought itself. Inside, the air was still. The light was dead, and the walls hummed softly with the whispers of dead stars. Starkiller sat motionless. Bound by manacles that fed static into his nerves, he could not tell where his flesh ended and the metal began. Every breath echoed like a confession. Every heartbeat was a metronome counting down to something nameless. He tried to meditate, as the Jedi once did, tried to summon the calm that Master Kota had taught him before the dark side consumed him. But the Force was not here. Not truly. What answered his call was something else, something older, crueler, endlessly hungry. It watched him through the cracks in reality. Time lost meaning within the cage. He did not sleep. He merely drifted between waking and the fever dreams of the warp. He saw visions, a sea of blood stretching to infinity, towers of gold collapsing beneath the weight of prayer, an ocean of faces, screaming his name not as savior, not as sinner, but as meal. At first, he tried to resist. But each time he reached for the Force, it came to him wrong, twisted. The energy that once obeyed his will now carried intention, whispering thoughts not his own. "Break the chains, child of another god. You were made to destroy, serve, and ascend." The voices slithered through him. He clenched his fists, shaking, trying to push them out. But the harder he fought, the louder they became. And then, something inside him answered. A pulse of crimson light erupted from his chest. The walls trembled. The sigils cracked. The air began to taste of copper and ozone. The guards outside screamed as their psychic wards overloaded. One by one, their minds burned out like candles in a storm. The ship lurched violently. Warning klaxons blared. He could hear the shouts of the crew beyond the door. Containment breach in Psyker Hold 7. The subject's resonance is destabilizing. By the throne, he's drawing power from the warp itself. They had no idea what they were witnessing. They thought they'd captured a man. They were wrong. Starkiller stood. The manacles snapped like brittle bone. The field of the null cage warped, then imploded. He staggered forward, his body flickering between flesh and shadow. The corridor beyond was chaos. Guards firing lasguns, priests screaming prayers, servo skulls detonating in bursts of holy fire. He moved through them like a phantom. Each gesture of his hand sent soldiers flying. Each step tore the air apart. Yet with every act of power, the force twisted further, becoming something feral, molten. The corridor rippled. Reality peeled open. He could see the warp now, not metaphor, not illusion, but truth. The walls of the ship melted into flesh. The stars beyond bled into rivers of light. And through that chaos, something vast stirred. A storm of colorless fire consumed his vision. He stood floated in a space without direction, without time. Here, every thought was a weapon, every breath a scream. The force and the warp became one, grinding against each other like ancient beasts fighting for dominance. His mind fractured. In one moment, he saw Vader, silent and accusing. In the next, he saw the Emperor of Mankind upon the golden throne, his decaying body glowing with divine fury. Both figures spoke in unison, though their words were different. Power is purpose. Power is burden. He screamed back at them, though no sound came. I am no one's weapon. The warp answered with laughter. Thousands of shapes began to form around him, souls of the dead, fragments of daemons, echoes of psychers who had burned themselves into nothing. They circled him, whispering, clawing, testing. Some bore wings made of light. Others were crawling masses of eyes and teeth. One stepped forward, a figure robed in smoke and fire. Its face shifted endlessly. Now a scholar, now a serpent, now a god. You wield the Force, it hissed. But here, the Force kneels. He raised his hands to strike, but his strength faltered. The entity extended its clawed fingers and touched his chest. He felt his essence unravel, his power spilling out into the ether like blood. Who are you? He gasped. Names are for mortals, it said. But you may call me Change, Sainch. He did not know the name, but he knew the feeling, the sickly ecstasy of curiosity and deceit. The god's laughter rippled through existence. Do you seek freedom? It asked. I seek control. Control is an illusion. Then I will master the illusion. For a heartbeat, the warp went still. The figure tilted its head, amused. Then perhaps you belong here more than you think. The vision shattered. He fell back into the physical world, gasping. The ship was gone. Or perhaps it had never been. He stood on the surface of a barren moon, surrounded by fragments of wreckage suspended in the air like relics of a broken dream. The stars above twisted into impossible constellations, forming eyes that watched him without blinking. His body was scorched, but alive. The Force pulsed within him again, different, heavier. When he closed his eyes, he could still hear the warp breathing through it. He staggered toward the largest fragment of the ship, a shattered bulkhead inscribed with the Aquila. Half of an inquisitorial emblem clung to it like a wound. Beside it lay the corpse of the Inquisitor who had captured him, his armor melted, his face locked in eternal horror. In his dead hand was a scorched purity seal. The parchment had one phrase that survived the fire. In his light, even monsters serve purpose. Starkiller stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. Not with joy, not with madness, but with understanding. He knelt beside the corpse and whispered, "Then let me be his monster." Above him, the warp storm crackled, rippling with veins of violet lightning. For the first time, Starkiller did not recoil. He reached into it deliberately, drawing power not from serenity or rage, but from acceptance. The energy obeyed. It flowed like molten gold, threading through his veins, rewriting the very laws that bound him. He no longer belonged to the Force alone. He was something new, an intersection between galaxies, between faiths, between madness and will. And far across the immaterium, upon the golden throne, the Emperor of mankind stirred. A faint light flickered behind his lifeless eyes, as though something ancient and familiar had brushed against his mind. A storm has entered the warp, but it does not belong to chaos. Starkiller stood tall, the storm swirling around him. The warp howled, but it did not consume him. Instead, it listened. For the first time since falling into this cursed universe, he did not feel like a victim. He felt like a beginning. The Force meets the warp, he whispered, gazing into the endless void. Let's see which one breaks first. There are moments in the warp when time ceases to exist, when the boundaries between thought and form melt away like wax before a black sun. That was where Starkiller found himself now. He stood upon what might once have been a battlefield, though the concept of ground had no meaning here. The terrain pulsed beneath his boots like living flesh, and rivers of light, of memory flowed around him. He saw reflections of himself in their shifting currents. Apprentice, traitor, killer, savior. Each image stared back at him, eyes hollow with accusation. Above, the sky bled infinity. It was not stars he saw there, but eyes endless, blinking, watching, knowing, and from that firmament of insanity came a voice. Smooth, layered, serpentine. You seek meaning in a place that devours meaning, little wanderer. The voice coiled around him like smoke. He turned, sabers flaring to life, their hums echoing across a horizon that wasn't real. Show yourself, he demanded. Reality rippled. A figure emerged, robed in shimmering impossibility. Its face shifted from one form to another. A scholar, a serpent, a woman crowned in feathers, a man with the eyes of a child. The figure bowed with mock grace. You may call me Change. Others, less poetic, call me Tsiench. The name rippled through his mind like oil on water. With it came the smell of burnt parchment, the sound of countless lies spoken as truths, and the dizzying sensation of comprehension just beyond reach. Starkiller gritted his teeth. I've seen gods before. They all demanded obedience. And what did they give you in return? He hesitated. Pain, he said finally. Ah, Tsiench whispered, its voice becoming many voices. Then you already understand the first truth. Pain is the coin of this reality. The god circled him, hands clasped behind its back, studying him like an artist inspecting a half-finished sculpture. You are not of this galaxy. You do not belong to its laws, yet you've touched the warp and lived. You've bent it, tasted its madness, and not been devoured. Barely, barely, the god repeated, smiling with too many mouths, is more than most. The warp around them began to reshape, ruins rising, towers spiraling upward, forming a city that existed only in idea. Sigils of change burned in the air. Books wrote themselves, then burst into flame. 1,000 winged creatures flew backward through time, singing hymns in reverse. Tsiench extended a hand. Upon its palm, galaxies spun. I offer you understanding, Starkiller. You wield a fragment of what could be. But your force, it is a leash, tied to the corpse of balance. The Jedi sought peace. The Sith sought power. Both were wrong. Only transformation endures. Transformation into what? Whatever you dare to imagine. Starkiller felt it then, the pull, the promise, the intoxicating sense of infinite possibility. Every atom of his being trembled with potential. He could see how the Force and the warp could merge, how one could fuel the other. He could become something beyond Jedi, beyond Sith, beyond human. But he remembered the Inquisitor's words, all will serve, and the Emperor's command, use it for mankind, or be devoured. You want me to serve you, he said. Tsiench laughed softly. No, I want you to serve yourself until you realize there is no difference. The city melted. The god grew larger, its form dissolving into patterns of light and darkness. Starkiller saw visions flooding his mind, armies kneeling before him, galaxies burning, the Emperor's throne empty, and upon it, himself. You could reshape this dying Imperium, Tsiench whispered. Tear down its hypocrisy, its stagnation, become the storm that renews creation. And in return, only what you already crave, freedom from the chains of destiny. He closed his eyes. The visions burned brighter. He saw the faces of those he'd killed, the rebel soldiers, the Jedi, his master. He saw the boy he once was, reaching for his father's hand as lightning consumed them both. Freedom, power, purpose, all illusions, all lies. He opened his eyes again. I've followed gods before. I've seen what faith does. It kills the will to question, the warp hissed. The god's many faces frowned, then smiled again, as though disappointment itself were merely another variable in its grand equation. You cannot escape belief, Starkiller. Every action is worship. Every dream is a prayer. Then I'll stop praying. And if you are wrong, then I'll burn with my own fire. The warp convulsed. The god's laughter echoed through eternity. So defiant, so predictable. You are exactly what I hoped you would be. Its form collapsed into smoke, swirling upward like ink into water. The last thing Starkiller heard before it vanished was a whisper that lodged itself deep in his mind. When the time comes, you will call upon me not as a servant, but as a mirror. Then the world fell away. He awoke on the moon again, lying in the ash of his own making. The sky above was silent, no gods, no storms, only the faint hum of the universe's heartbeat. He was alone, but something had changed. The force pulsed differently now, deeper, darker, richer. It no longer felt divided between light and dark. It was one continuum, and he was its center. When he lifted his hand, the air shimmered. Particles rearranged themselves into symbols he did not understand, sigils of the warp. He clenched his fist, and they shattered into sparks. For a fleeting moment, he felt complete. And then the pain began. It started as a tremor, then a scream that tore through every nerve. His vision split into 1,000 perspectives, each version of himself screaming, burning, dissolving. The force and the warp fought inside him like rival beasts. He collapsed, clawing at the ground, his blood boiling. In the distance, a shadow moved, a figure in silver armor, haloed in holy light. The sound of chanting followed, mechanical and pure. Grey Knights, the Emperor's hunters of daemons. They had come for the thing he was becoming. He dragged himself upright, vision blurring, body flickering between matter and energy. The sky split open again, warp light pouring down upon him like divine judgment. Come then, he whispered, half laughing through the pain. Let's see which god claims me first. He ignited his sabers. Their blades howled like living things. And as the Grey Knights descended from orbit, their prayers echoing across the burning sky, Starkiller stood against them, a heretic, a weapon, a man standing between two universes, cursed to be both and neither. They fell from heaven like silver oaths. Meteor-bright drop capsules carved screaming wounds through the air, trailing contrails of sanctified fire. Each impact rang like a cathedral bell being hurled against the earth. From the split shells strode warriors wrought in living scripture, Grey Knights. Paladins born to name the unnameable and end it. Their armor gleamed with prayers hammered into adamant. Their helms bore lenses like cold moons. Halos of machine light crowned them as they formed a spearhead around him. The first to speak did not raise his weapon. He raised his voice, a litany like a turbine spinning up to war. By Titan's oath and blade anointed, identify, demonic, Xenos, Psyker. Starkiller answered with the only truth that still belonged to him. I am power that refused a master. They advanced. The ground shuddered under boots heavier than verdicts. A warding incantation rolled over the battlefield, bass deep, metallic, relentless like a tide of iron washing the color out of the world. Where the sound passed, the warp's heat receded a degree. The air clarified, and his breath crystallized in his lungs. He ignited both sabers. Blue and red flared like opposing horizons stitched too close together. The blades hummed discord into the choir. Then the bolters spoke. Mass reactive shells traced a crown of sparks around him. He moved through the pattern before it closed, the force sliding under his feet like a second shadow. He struck at the nearest knight, parry, pivot, draw, and the parried stroke felt like hitting a bell tower. Sanctified ceramite screamed but did not split. The knight's counterblow came faster than something that size should move. Starkiller slipped it by a breath, turned the momentum into a telekinetic whip that sent two others staggering, and the litany rose. It hit him like cold surf, a pressure that was not mass but meaning. Their prayers carried function here. Sound became architecture. He felt the space around him lock into gridded certainties, like a cage made of definitions. He cut the grid. The red blade howled as it sheared a line through the hymn's geometry. The world unhinged again. Heat poured back in. He dragged a crushed drop pod up from the earth with a jerk of his palm and hurled it like a moon. Two knights vanished under the avalanche. A third held out a gauntlet studded with silver sigils and stopped the tumbling wreck in a crackling field of consecrated math. "Enough," the Justicar said, voice steady inside the storm. His daemon hammer came up with ritual inevitability. "You are a wound. We close wounds." Starkiller laughed once, harsh and bright. "Then bleed with me." He tore. Not metal, not flesh. Context. The warp bent in a radius around him, a lens that refracted causality. Gravity forgot its instructions. Dust rose like reverse rain. The litany became a ragged stutter as syllables slipped off their places. In that slackening, he moved blink fast, behind the hammer's arc, Saber's twin comets. Impact. A detonation of warding runes. The red blade skated, squealing, across sanctified plating, the blue bit half an inch, before a thunderclap of forced equilibrium threw him back as if a god had said no. He hit the ground and slid through cinders. The knights pressed. A psy-cannon barked judgment, and the air filled with flechettes of glowing denial. He caught them on a telekinetic plane that flashed like glass under floodlight, then let the plane collapse into a cone that returned the storm. A knight staggered as his own verdicts came home, pauldrons cratered in a halo of sparks. Designation remains indeterminate, the Justicar said into the Vox haze. Treat as archdaemon. Circle. Close. Finish. The circle tightened. Behind them, reality twitched. The fight had ripened the air. Blood, song, and certainty made bait. Tears appeared where no blades had cut hairline fractures in being. Something pressed a tongue to the cracks. Whispering began. Not speech. Hunger spelling itself. The knights felt it too. Their hymn turned against the edges, thickening into mortar. Starkiller felt the dual pull destroy the prayer, so the warp could bite. Preserve the prayer, so he could breathe. He chose a third road that only existed while he chose it. He fed the hymn to the warp. He caught a thread of the litany in his left hand, yes, with a hand. Here, syntax bent like copper in flame twined it with a strand of force from his right, and braided them until the rope smoked through his fingers. He cast it outward, a tether with hooks in both worlds. The battlefield shuddered. The cracks widened, not into absence but into form. Daemons came, not armies. This was a skirmish, a taste. A mass of eyes like wet pearls rolling in an open wound, a bird with too many wings and not enough sky. A child of knives standing on tiptoe to touch a star. They poured into the circle as if it were a chalice. The knights did not break. They advanced with machine serenity, each step punctuated by an amen that looked like a muzzle flash. Daemon hammers described parabolas of doctrine. Warped flesh burst into disciplined ash. In that burning geometry, Starkiller found a corridor of opportunity. He moved through it as through a collapsing cathedral, his sabers tolling different times. He cut a daemon from throat to hypothesis. He battered aside a hammer with a telekinetic palm that shook his bones. He stepped through a psalm and came out behind its last syllable to drive a blade beneath a knight's gorget, then saw the man's eyes behind the lenses. Human, tired, praying. The hesitation lasted less than a breath. It was enough. Runes detonated at contact. His arm went numb to the shoulder. The knight sagged, sanctity exhausted but intact, and another stepped into the space with the blank mercy of a guillotine. Pain blossomed, white and undeniable. Something had broken in him that didn't have a name inside physics. He tasted copper and found it was his own memories leaking. A hangar deck on Raxus Prime, Kota's voice saying, "You are more than your rage," Vader's breath like a metronome for despair. He staggered. The circle began to close for real. Now, the Justicar said, they moved as one. Hammers rose, as if lifted by a single arm. Psi-light gathered, folding toward a point whose location was obedience. Starkiller planted his feet in the ruin. The warp pressed against his scars, asking to be let all the way in. Every god he'd met by name, by rumor, by silhouette leaned into the seam of him. Serve and survive. Serve and devour. Serve and become story. Never again, he whispered to all of them. He stopped pulling. He stopped pushing. He fell not down, not away, but through the idea that power had to be an argument with the world. The force uncoiled without a destination. The warp opened without teeth. For a breath thin as a hair, they met like two storm fronts that recognized themselves. Light with no color ruptured from him. It made no sound. It had the texture of a choice finally told the truth. The circle blew wide. Knights hurled back like seeds in gale. Daemons evaporated into punctuation commas of ash, ellipses of light. The hymn tore root and branch, then regrew as something quieter that did not need witnesses. Starkiller stood in the eye he had made. The Justicar rose from a crater of melted iconography. His halo guttered, then steadied. He looked at Starkiller for a long time, and the battlefield took their measure like a clerk writing down two difficult names. "You are not a demon," he said at last. "You are a heresy." "Good," Starkiller said, voice raw. "Write a new book." They came together again, because that is what oaths and outcasts do. The second clash felt smaller and infinitely more personal. Heat haze bent the edges of their shadows. Hammer met saber with the ceremony of storms shaking hands. He saw the micro-fractures in the haft. The Justicar saw the micro-tremors in his grip. Each chose ruthlessness. The blow that ended it was mutual. His blue blade found the joint where sanctity met engineering. The hammer found the rib where will met bone. Both struck true. Both men fell to one knee. Both stayed there, breathing like forges. Around them, the last daemons thinned to misprints. The surviving knights formed a tired circle with gaps shaped like friends. No one raised a weapon. There is a kind of silence that only follows hymns and executions. It arrived and sat with them. The Justicar levered himself upright. He coughed iron and spoke without threat. "Withdraw," he ordered his squad, not taking his eyes off Starkiller. "The calculus has changed." "Acknowledged," came flat, grieving voices. They departed the way they had come, like architecture deciding to be sky again. Drop engines bruised the horizon. Ash lifted to greet them and fell disappointed. Starkiller remained kneeling. He was not sure when he had dropped the red saber. The blue still hummed low, like a heart deciding whether to continue. He closed it. The world dimmed by a degree he had not expected to miss. He lay back and watched a sky invent constellations it would forget by morning. Pain moved through him, cataloging rooms in a house he hadn't known he owned. He counted breaths until he lost the numbers. A wind rose and smelled like old paper and solder. Far away, a throne he had never seen turned its attention for a fraction of a second. In that glance there was something like recognition, or warning, or both. "You have stepped between dogma and need. We have a word for that. We call it useful." He did not know whether the thought was his. When he finally slept, if this kind of threshold could be called sleep, he dreamed he was a bridge with no river under it, chosen anyway, bearing anyway, singing anyway. And somewhere just beyond the edge of dream, a door waited. He did not yet know it opened toward a throne that ate men and called it morning. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, heat, weight, silence. He thought he was still on the battlefield until he realized the battlefield was inside him. Every heartbeat echoed like thunder through halls of shattered light. His veins glowed faintly, carrying not blood but motionless fire. Around him, the world had gone still. Ash frozen mid-fall, broken sigils caught in suspension, air holding its breath. He had stopped time without meaning to. Or perhaps time, out of pity, had stopped for him. He tried to move. The pain was gentle, now too gentle. It felt like the calm that precedes either healing or death. Which one did I earn? The thought rippled outward, and something vast answered, "Neither. You have been claimed." The voice was not one voice. It was the hum of engines older than suns, the rustle of parchment prayers, the breath of billions whispering the same name. And beneath it all, the same steady presence he had felt since his arrival, the Emperor. Light broke through the clouds in measured columns, as if the sky itself was kneeling. In the radiance he saw outlines, the ruined moon stretching to a horizon of metal dunes, the corpses of the fallen grey knights now lying in perfect repose, their armor untarnished, their wounds sealed by unseen hands. Something had rewritten the scene into ceremony. A golden shape walked out of the light, not flesh but will-given architecture. It bore a human outline, yet every feature was refracted through eternity. "You have touched my realm and endured," the Emperor said, not with lips, but with inevitability. "Few minds survive the taste of the warp without dissolving. You have bent it to your purpose." "No," Starkiller murmured. "It bent me." "Then you have learned the first law of power. It is always mutual." The Emperor's gaze, terrible and kind, fell upon the sabers at Starkiller's feet. "You sought freedom. In doing so, you have remade yourself into a bridge between two forces that cannot coexist. A bridge between control and chaos, between faith and hunger, between the dream of humanity and the nightmare that sustains it." The words burned. "And what am I to do with that?" "Stand where others fall." The golden light dimmed, revealing not a man but a throne vast, mechanical, breathing in pulses of psychic flame. Cables thicker than towers vanished into the clouds. The air throbbed with the weight of 1,000,000 prayers per heartbeat. Through those prayers flowed agony, love, obedience. The sound of a species trying to speak to its god, and finding its god already dead but refusing to stop listening. He understood, suddenly, what the throne was. A machine built to hold a dying god upright long enough for his children to forget he was dying. "You keep them alive," Starkiller said quietly, "by letting yourself rot." "Sacrifice is the only currency the universe respects," the Emperor replied. "Would you do less if you could hold your galaxy together by pain alone?" He almost laughed. "I already did." Something like approval, cold, remote, genuine, passed between them. "Then you understand why I need you," the Emperor said. "The warp recognizes you. It fears you as kin. I can shape that fear into weaponry, into protection." Starkiller felt the pull again, the same gravity that once drew him to Vader's command, to Palpatine's promise, to Tzeentch's deceit. The offer of belonging disguised as duty. "Another leash," he said. "Another purpose," the Emperor corrected. "One you may define yourself." For a moment, he saw the galaxy through the Emperor's eyes. 10,000 worlds flickering like candles in a wind of madness. Endless wars, endless prayers, endless hope denied yet never extinguished. He felt the burden crush against his chest, the infinite bureaucracy of faith and fear. It was unbearable. It was divine. "You can't hold this forever," Starkiller said. "Even gods burn out. Then inherit my fire." The throne blazed. The light devoured the horizon. He tried to step back, but his feet rooted in molten stone. Golden chains of energy coiled around his limbs, not binding, but connecting. Every pulse carried the memory of a dying sun. The force surged through him, bright, clean, defiant. The warp answered, dark, wild, infinite. They met in the architecture of his bones, fusing like iron and lightning. He screamed once. Not in fear. In recognition, he saw everything. Worlds where the Emperor never rose, where humanity fell to chaos before it learned language. Futures where the Grey Knights became the monsters they hunted. Realities where he himself sat upon the throne, cold and perfect, a statue lit by prayers he could no longer hear. The multiverse turned itself like a coin in his mind. Both sides were loss. When the light subsided, he stood at the foot of the throne. The chains were gone. In their place was a thin line of fire running down his spine, a connection, voluntary yet irreversible. "Now you carry a fraction of what I bear," the Emperor said. "Not servitude, symmetry." "If I take this power," Starkiller asked, "what happens to me?" "You ascend. You disappear. You begin." The world folded. He found himself standing above it, no longer bound by mass. Below stretched the Imperium, an ocean of rust and devotion glowing against the dark. Fleets crawled between stars. Planets burned and rebuilt and burned again. He could hear the noise of every prayer, every dying breath, every child naming a god they would never see. The Force and the warp intertwined within him, no longer rivals but organs of the same body. He was equilibrium through contradiction, a balance that required constant violence to remain standing. He realized, with grim amusement, that the Emperor had not chosen him as heir. He had chosen him as interface, a conduit where divine light and damnation could mingle without annihilation. "You've turned me into a relay," he whispered to the void. "Into a possibility," the void answered in the Emperor's tone. "A second path." For the first time since the storm had swallowed him, Starkiller smiled. "Then let's see what the galaxy does with it." He extended his hand. Beneath him, a warp storm shifted course, its fury reorganizing into deliberate motion. Fleets caught in its wake found their Geller fields strengthening instead of shattering. Astropaths, long blind, glimpsed a new beacon flaring beside the Astronomicon, a twin light, fainter but freer. Some named it the Wound Reversed, others called it the Rebel Star. High on Terra, the Emperor's eyes opened for one impossible heartbeat. The Mechanicus scribes stationed near the throne recorded nothing. Their minds edited out miracles by habit, but across the immaterium, a whisper began to spread. Not a god's command, not a daemon's lure. A single phrase, clear and human. Power need not corrupt if it remembers why it was feared. When Starkiller descended back into his new flesh, the world welcomed him with quiet ruin. His sabers hovered beside him, reforged by forces no forge could name. Their blades burned gold, not light, not fire, but memory. He stood upon the same plane where he had fallen, now empty except for the wind and the echo of hymns long finished. He was neither Sith nor Jedi, neither servant nor saint. He was function, a man-shaped answer to a question the universe had forgotten it asked. And above him, two suns burned, one real, one reflected. The galaxy, ever hungry, turned toward both. They would tell the story poorly at first. On backwater shrine worlds where night arrives like a verdict, cloistered scribes would scratch uncertain glyphs about a second light that walked beside the Astronomicon for a single breath of galactic time. On void ships crewed by the pious and the terrified, astropaths would blink salt from their eyes and whisper of a presence that steadied their minds without demanding their kneeling. And in the bunkers of men who expected to die at dawn, someone would swear that a storm bent away for once, like a dog remembering it had a master. They would name it many things: the Wound Reversed, the Rebel Star, the False Beacon, the Traitor's Mercy. The names would quarrel, as all names do. Only the silence beneath them would agree. In that silence, Starkiller listened. He no longer slept. Sleep requires forgetting, and forgetting had been burned out of him like dross from iron. He still walked of a sort, not with legs, but with impulse. Wherever prayer curdled into despair, wherever Geller fields thinned to a rumor, wherever a single psyker's scream threatened to teach the room what screaming is, he arrived as a pressure change, as a missing second, as the calm between a volley and the tally of the dead. Sometimes he wore a body again, because bodies reassure the frightened and offend the powerful. In meat and synthbone he strode through manufactorums that sounded like penance, through cathedrals that smelled like old oil and new blood, through command decks where captains pretended their maps were mercy. People looked up and saw a figure with two sabers burning, a color memory couldn't keep. Some fell to their knees, some raised their guns. He did not blame either. He had learned blame's secret. It prays to the past and calls it justice. On an escort frigate called Litania Silentium, a navigator's third eye opened too far and saw a city no one had built yet. The crew began to sing in 6 wrong languages. He arrived as every voice chose the same note and held it like a cliff edge. He did not smite or command. He tuned. A fractional twist of reality's peg, a gentle pressure where harmony had cracked, and the ship's song fell back into human throats. For 3 minutes after, the entire crew wept and could not say why. The captain filed no report. He burned one, carefully. On a forge moon that circled a dead star, a Magos Biologis bred a choir of lobotomized psychers to reinforce the station's failing wards. Their mouths sang binary, their brains bled music. He arrived as the last of them forgot its name and reached for a god with no hands. He stood in front of the glass, and the god on the other side stood with him. The Magos called it an anomaly and reached for a lever. The lever broke. He left nothing behind but a line of melted ceramite and a headache the Mechanicus could not catalogue. On a penitent world, The ecclesiarchy marched 1,000 children into the ocean to lighten the planet's thoughts before a crusade. He stepped into the surf, and the tide receded a meter for every step he took, as if the sea had put down its sword. "Miracle," said the priest, breathless. "Mutant," said the commissar, steady. "Enough," said Starkiller, and the word weighed more than anyone in earshot could carry. He was not kind, he was not cruel. He was function wearing a scar where a man had been. The warp learned him like a new note. It sought to imitate, to counterfeit, to devour, because that is what it does to every shape that moves through it. But he had stopped believing in ownership the moment he accepted the throne's terrible symmetry. He belonged to purpose now, which is the only belonging that does not rot if you forget to worship it. The gods reacted as gods do. Khorne tested him on a world that bled iron. War machines crawled over the horizon like absolutes. He did not meet them in the arena. He rearranged the arena. Gravity leaned sideways for an afternoon, and trajectory remembered humility. Chainswords learned to stutter. The god bellowed. Echoes died of embarrassment. Nurgle offered him peace. An orchard of quiet endings where every wound had a place and a story. He walked its rows and touched none of its fruit. "I have loved rest," he said, and left with empty hands. Slaanesh sent him the purest choir ever assembled, 1,000,000,000 voices, perfectly in tune, singing a self into being so exquisite that the universe would have murdered itself just to keep listening. He listened to the first bar, wept, and closed the door with the gentleness of a physician. Some doors require respect to remain locked. Tzeentch only laughed. When the laugh got tired, it became advice. When he took the advice and did not become property, the laughter returned, renewed and sincere. The Inquisition revised its threat index, a sacrament masquerading as paperwork. Some ordos called for his atomization on sight. Others argued for containment, for study, for a leash that would look like a handshake. A minority suggested something radical. Leave it alone and see what the galaxy does when a law appears that doesn't start with, "Thou shalt." He did not visit Terra again. That would have made him an argument, and he had chosen to be an answer. Still, the throne and he exchanged pulses across distances that ordinary mathematics would call offensive. Sometimes he felt the Emperor's patience like an architectural principle holding a roof up past its blueprint. Sometimes he felt nothing at all and counted the nothings like rosary beads. You can pray to absence if you learn the correct posture. He learned it. On nights that had no sky, he knelt in shipboard chapels and in the unadorned corners of penal barracks and in maintenance shafts that smelled like tears no one admitted to. He spoke to no one, and no one listened. That is to say, he prayed perfectly. The words were always different and always the same. "I will hold the storm until someone better arrives. If no one better comes, I will hold it anyway. If I fail, let the failure teach courage, not despair." Between prayers, work. He taught captains to burn fuel as if they had to account for it before a mercy they did not believe in. He taught serfs to breathe into paper bags when the Jella field flickered and to kick the generator only on the offbeat. He taught psychers to call their fear by diminutives and not to feed it after midnight. He taught a sister of battle to forgive herself for not killing him, and she taught him the difference between discipline and cruelty. It was a short lesson with a long aftertaste. He killed, too. The galaxy retains a quota. When a daemon wore a saint's face so well that even its shadow smelled like incense, he cut until truth fell out. When a warlord declared himself emperor of a subsector on the strength of a vocabulary and a firing squad, Starkiller visited his balcony and demonstrated why height is not power. When a rogue trader offered to sell him back to the Inquisition in exchange for absolution, Starkiller offered a bargain in return: keep his soul, lose his ship. The ship agreed with Starkiller. He kept count, not of bodies, of decisions. The tally terrified him correctly. Terror kept him honest and small. He liked small. Small survives where grand gestures become memorials. Sometimes the lightsabers stayed cold. His hands learned new holiness, turning wrenches, resetting breakers, lifting rubble, catching a falling child, brewing recaf at 0300 for a navigator who had seen too much geometry. On those days, the Force hummed like a satisfied generator, and the warp purred like a bomb held by a friend who absolutely should not be trusted. He called that alignment grace and did not try to improve the term. Rumors, meanwhile, did what rumors always do when fed the thin diet of truth. They grew gorgeous and unhelpful. Some said he was a sanctioned weapon of the High Lords. Others said he was the Emperor's sin walking off its penance. A few whispered that he had once been a man from a dead myth who learned a new grammar for power. Those few did not raise their voices. They did not need to. In time, months, centuries, the unit is mood, the rebel star dimmed, not gone. Stars do not end, they change tense. His presence became less visitation and more condition. You did not see him. You operated in a world that remembered he had passed through and adjusted its posture accordingly. Geller fields were tuned a hair kinder. Hymns were written in keys that made room for breath. Executions required more paperwork. Small mercies accumulated like interest. He stood one last time in a place that felt like a beginning, a moon of ash, a horizon of quiet machinery, air tasting faintly of soldered prayer. He let the body go. It folded without drama, as a cloak does when a journey ends at a door you recognize. Wind moved. Ash lifted, decided to be snow, and changed its mind. The universe held its breath the way a singer does before the note that makes the song necessary. He spoke. Not aloud, aloud is for rooms. He spoke in a tense he had invented for himself, halfway between vow and observation. The Force is not with you, he told the galaxy he had not learned to hate. It is you, when you choose to be larger than your fear. The words went out and did not ask to be believed. They asked to be used. Psychers woke with a chill and felt less alone for a single heartbeat per day. Grey knights who had survived him knelt before relics and admitted for the length of one blink that utility sometimes wears heresy like a uniform. A forgotten child in a hive found the courage to refuse a knife and learned to run before running became liturgy. A magos adjusted a dial because the number felt wrong and did not write down why. A confessor forgave a man who had not asked. Both wept and laughed, correctly unsure which came first. On the golden throne, a light flickered with statistical insignificance and refused to stop. The storm rolled on. Storms do. They are older than our reasons. But here and there, in patrol ships and pilgrim caravans and in the dreams of men who thought dreams were for the weak, a pressure eased. Choices appeared where none had been advertised. The hymn lost a verse and found a better one. They would still tell the story poorly, because stories are bones and this was marrow. That was fine. Echoes are patient. And if, at the edge of sleep, a voice like a hinge moving in oil ever whispered to those who had learned to listen, if it said, "Hold fast, ask better questions, do not mistake permission for purpose," well, that was only the galaxy remembering the shape of a man who had decided not to be a god. Somewhere beyond doctrine and appetite, a bridge stretched across a chasm that no longer needed a name. It did not lead to paradise. It led to work. He held. We crossed. It began with a hum, a vibration so low that only machines felt it first. Deep within the crust of a dying forge world, an ancient reactor older than the Imperium itself awoke. The Magi assigned to it did not know why. Their sensors reported no flux, no breach, no fault. And yet, the machinery sang. The frequency was inaudible to flesh, but it threaded itself through cogitators, data slates, voxnets. A tone without origin, harmonic, patient. When decoded, it yielded no message, only balance. Across the segmentum solar, ships drifting blind through warp storms found their drives suddenly quiet, their astropaths unbleeding. Hive worlds endured a single day without riots. On one agri moon, a child born blind opened her eyes to see the sunrise for the first and last time of her life. Some said it was the Emperor, others, a malfunction of faith. But the old navigators whispered another name, the one no record admitted but every dream remembered. Starkiller, the rebel star, the man who taught the warp to breathe. On Terra, the Mechanicus chroniclers recorded a new data anomaly. A secondary pulse mirrored the Astronomicon at a ratio of 1 heartbeat in 10,000. Harmless, yet impossible. An inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus proposed immediate extermination of all vessels aligned with the frequency. Another, older, wiser, said nothing and signed the report filed. Pending clarification by the throne. The High Lords did not read it. The Emperor did not need to. Far beneath their spires, the golden throne sighed. Its machinery shifted by the width of an atom, as though to make room. For the first time in 10 millennia, the light that crowned its occupant pulsed off-beat a harmony instead of a solo. The custodians felt it, bowed, and told no one. And somewhere between real space and the echo of itself, Starkiller moved again. He did not walk, for there was no ground. He did not speak, for there was no air. He simply existed where existence required translation, where thought became geometry and emotion learned to wear armor. In that place, he listened to the two great hungers. The warp, still restless, still infinite, whispering mine, and the force, serene but lonely, whispering ours. He did not answer either. He was done with pronouns of possession. He reached instead into the quiet between them, the interval where creation hesitates, and wrote a single word with the energy of his being. Continue. Reality obliged. A fleet of pilgrim vessels bound for the eastern fringe vanished into a storm that should have eaten them. Instead, they reappeared weeks later on the other side, crew alive, cargo intact, every candle in their chapels still lit. The captain claimed a voice had spoken through the Jella field as the storm closed in. Hold fast, ask better questions. The ecclesiarchy declared it heresy. The crew built a shrine anyway. On a death world whose name had been lost to censorship, a grey knight knelt before a broken monument. He had survived 100 campaigns, seen demons unright sons, but this wound on the world unsettled him more than any victory. He placed his hammer on the ground and whispered into the soil, "Did you win, heretic?" The wind answered not with words, but with stillness. He smiled, which in his order was blasphemy, and left his weapon there. The hammer hummed softly for centuries after, tuned to a note no choir dared imitate. In the void, a rogue trader stumbled upon a drifting object, a helmet, scorched black, half melted, bearing no crest or sigil. Inside it, a crystal flickered a miniature star caged in glass. When held, it pulsed with a rhythm that matched the holder's heartbeat. When released, it dimmed, patient. They called it the Heart of Two Suns and sold it to an inquisitor who never reached port. The artifact was last seen in the hands of a young acolyte who claimed it whispered of bridges and work. A century became 1,000 years. The Imperium changed by not changing. Such is its genius. But somewhere in its deep routines, its faith, its bureaucracy, its despair, a subroutine of mercy persisted. Tiny, inefficient, untraceable. Every time an order was written for extermination, a clerk's pen slipped. Every time a child was chosen for sacrifice, a lottery number repeated. Every time a weapon jammed before it could end a soul that might have mattered, the engineers blamed dust. The dust smiled, and far beyond the edges of any chart, at the lip of the galaxy where starlight thins into possibility, a storm turned inward upon itself. Its colors, if color meant anything there, folded into silence. At its center hung a single figure made of memory and will. He looked down at what he had made, or what had made him. He saw no triumph, no tragedy, only process. The galaxy was not healed. It had simply remembered how to try. That was enough. He felt the throne's awareness brush his mind again, brief, approving, tired. A monarch and a heretic sharing the same breath of eternity. We hold, still, until they learn to walk without gods. He nodded once, though no eyes could see. He turned then, toward the dark between galaxies, the place where the Force flowed uncorrupted, untouched by prayer or plague. He could hear its call, gentle and honest. For the first time since his fall, he allowed himself to answer. He stepped forward, and the warp did not resist. It parted around him like dawn around a shadow that had earned its outline. Every soul he had touched, every captain, every child, every daemon who had learned fear again felt a sudden warmth and could not explain it. In the Imperial Palace, a candle guttered and relit itself. In the Black Library, a page rewrote a single sentence. Knowledge without compassion is the slowest extinction. In a forgotten corner of the Materium, a woman dreamed of twin suns orbiting the same grave, and woke believing that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow was negotiable. And as he vanished into the space between truths, his last thought was neither prayer nor farewell. It was something simpler, lighter, a craftsman checking his work. The bridge holds, then silence. but not the silence of endings, the silence of foundations, the kind on which new voices, unafraid, might one day build.